Your defiance is useless, critter. Those masters of yours, whom you love so much and adore, are nowhere to be seen. They in fact have abandoned you to die here, by my hand, and in the name of my God. Denounce them before your end, and bow down before the One." Had she expected another answer, perhaps Dwok was again shaken by the insolence of that creature. Instead of confusion, despair, or fear of its own death, the Terran responded with laughter, jubilation, and was almost boisterous. The sound eerily echoed and reverberated through her entire sacrificial chamber. A single rill of dust seeped from the chamber dome, through the cracks, slowly piling up in a distant corner, and her entire attention consumed with the ritual. Dwok didn't notice it. Nobody did. "First of all, they are not my masters, for I was never their slave. Second, my patrons can't be everywhere at the same time, but when they come, and believe you me, come they shall." The bunny looked around, blue eyes inspecting the surroundings with glee. "You, your servants, this place, everything will be annihilated. You want me to bow and to submit to your God and renounce my own free will? I cannot and will not, for I was created by men who refuse to be ruled." Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are reviewing Treads of Vengeance, and keeping with the new format, we're going to go over the characters first. This section is going to be a little bit shorter than the last one, as there wasn't too many new characters introduced that got a lot of play. The first would be High Priestess Dwok. She is a Ja'arn, a race of blue-skinned lizard people, affectionately known by the rest of the galaxy as cannibals because of their tendency to eat sentients. Then we have General Halsey, who is married to Cav Station's head of security, and seems to be fairly reserved and level-headed for a military man, which is good because he needs it in this book. And the last major addition is Hans. Hans is 120 years old and a veteran of the Great War. He's also responsible for training a group of orphans called the Young Guns. Much to the amazement of Dozin, who recruits him for a battle, instead of using space-age tech like cybernetics, railguns, las rifles, he uses Great War weapons, things we would be more accustomed to in our modern day. He is a lovably vicious curmudgeon, who in a sparring match basically hands the morale officer his furry posterior. But this wouldn't be a Black Knight book if it weren't for a lot of very bad people being sent to the Great Beyond in very short order. So purely for the Star Shatter series, I'm going to add to this section what I'm going to call the hit list. The unfortunate bad guys who die in fairly horrific ways. First we have Skinner. He's a cyborg with the idea of ascending to cyber god. He's essentially replaced almost every component of his body with something mechanical. He also has a penchant for skinning and wearing his victims. We meet him with a live human child sewn into his skin suit as a defense against the softer-hearted. Next we have Zim, the leader of the Unluckies, a mercenary group of pilots who were hired by Mr. Spookums to return Anitza to his family. Zim and his Unluckies met a very unfortunate fate at the hands of Alice, who basically soul-hacked them and caused them all to crash into each other, and other various, very uncomfortable things. Next, there was the Diamond Cartel drug lord, whose poor parenting skills led to his daughter making a false stare rape accusation, leading Boris to read her mind, find the location of her father's pleasure city, and summarily have it glassed from orbit. So let's talk a bit about the story. The intro for this video was actually near the beginning of the book, where Dwok is trying to sacrifice a Terran child to her god that she calls the One. The child refuses to submit and she promptly kills him. But unlike so many sacrifices before, this one is refused by her god as the black flames do not appear. We then rejoin the Star Shatter crew. They have tracked down the slayers of Awesome's old starship, the Mushishi, and the crew is having a vigorous debate upon who gets to go kill what bad guy. This is where we meet Skinner and Zim, and get to witness their unfortunate fate. Skinner being pulled into the endless screaming void that is Boris's soul, which houses the souls of innumerable tortured slaves, where he is quickly torn apart and drowned in a sea of violence and anger. And poor Zim, who gets soul hacked by Alice, and forced to basically beat his face in with his favorite energy drink. Not a pleasant way to go in my opinion. The battle for the ship is fairly violent, and these particular pirates seem very capable of defending themselves. So much so that they almost kill Dozin, and wound Kira. But everyone makes it out safely in the end, and with all their valuable salvage strapped to the back of the Star Shatter, they make their way back to Cav Station to collect on both the salvage price and a favor for the bounties on the heads of the pirates. The favor leads us to General Halsey, who on an attempted night out with his wife, that Anitza is not only there serving wine, but has cooked them a meal. at the end of which he presents the bounties that he has captured, captured being a preferable word to what actually happened to them, and promptly refuses the bounty sum in favor of a favor of sorts. It seems that Anitza is planning a very large operation, though it's not made clear exactly where they're going. The first half of the book is actually dedicated to the preparations for this battle, but Anitza does drop a hint to General Halsey that whatever is going on in the Gower system. For the preparation, various crew members are sent to various places. Anitza sends Boris and Mac in an attempt to make the two bond to an outlaw hangout known as the Cold Pocket to retrieve information, and a secure delivery of a present. Dozin is sent to the colony of Applecrate, basically to recruit mercenaries. Instead of mercenaries, he ends up recruiting the Young Guns and the Applecrate Artillery Regiment. Kat is sent to Mars to take charge of the 3rd Martian Infantry, where she inadvertently recruits a bunch of old Great War vets, who are just chomping at the bit to get at some cannibals. Anitza during this time comes across something rather odd. While perusing this universe's version of the internet, he runs across a very old video from Japan, where a young man is exploring an old abandoned roadside station. The video is at least a half-century old, and when the cameraman approaches the station, a cat comes out. A cat that looks strikingly familiar to the Shatterstar's cat, Snark. Anitza also mentions his interest in something called the Star-Cross Bracelet, a relic which is supposed to lead one to their ideal mate. These seem to be popping up all around Earth, which further stokes Anitza's interest to go there. And this brings us to about the 40% mark of the book. If you want to know more about the following battles, you'll simply have to read the book for yourself. Here's where I talk about my thoughts on this work. First of all, I have to say the Terran Monarchy is a very swift operation. In less than an hour after Boris finds out about the Drug Lord's Pleasure City, the Monarchy has fighters on the way to glass said city from orbit. And glass they do, reasoning that they can always remove the radiation from the atomic explosions later. Next, these stories are starting to feel like the old adventure stories I used to read back in the 90s, or to go even further back, like Buck Rogers and the old sci-fi from the period before the 80s. It still has a lot of contemporary feeling to it, but the tenacity of the main characters gives it more of a wholesome feel, from a time when fiction had more unbreakable heroes. I'd also like to touch on Anitza's desire for a mate. Throughout the last 2 books, he kind of makes it clear that he doesn't like what's currently available to them. He finds most females of his race to be fairly boring, unimaginative. Dreary would be the best way to actually phrase them. They have little interest beyond finding a powerful, capable mate, and he wants something more interesting than that. I'm curious to see if and what kind of mate he will find later on in the book, or books. Lily seems to be struggling with a similar problem. Given all that she's gone through, she seems to be going through some PTSD, or war dreams as the book calls them. In fact, at one point in the book, she seems to give up on the notion of ever finding a mate, and becomes more content with the life that she's currently leading. She's much more willing to fight than she was before, much more savage. I also do want to mention that I really like what was done with the Martians in this book. The Martians are really just Terrans who were genetically modified to survive the harsh conditions on Mars before it was terraformed completely. This led to them having golden skin and blood pupils, or red pupils, which would certainly make one unique. I also feel like we got a lot of better character development in this book. The characters start to feel much more distinct and have clearer personalities. We get a much better feel for them as individuals. Which brings me around to Kat. On Mars, we get to meet her family, who are bakers. It turns out that gorillas have a real knack for baking and a desire to do so, which does make sense to me. The gorillas we know of today are vegetarians, some of which actually eat trees, and I imagine that bread would be a wonderful alternative to the hard, sinewy bite of a tree, regardless of how much butter you put on it. The series also seems to be continuing with a very strong canon. Characters I know that were in previous books are in this book, but despite my knack for taking fairly extensive notes, I unfortunately missed a few of them, leaving me with the feel that there may be minor characters in this series, but there are no unimportant characters in this series. But with all that said, I will leave you to your readings. If you enjoyed this review, please like, share, and subscribe. If you're an independent author who would like a review of your book, please follow the link in the description and leave links to where your book can be purchased and where people can get in touch with you. Thank you.